Hare Krishna, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava. Today, I'm taking another question from a viewer. I've gotten so many good questions lately. Thank you, everybody, and feel free to keep them coming. Just email me info@nightlightastrology.com with Bhakti Q&A in the subject line. Well, this question comes in and it has two parts, and I decided I'm going to break it up into two videos. So part one question goes like this. I'm all in favor of the journey is the destiny thing. And I can totally see how trying to possess something in this life or any other is a fool's errand. I'm just wondering about spiritual desire in bhakti. I understand you're not desiring to be one with God. So is it simply to be with God in a form of heaven? Great question. So it's kind of like a yes and no. And I'll try to explain it. And of course, this is the best I've understood to this point, right? So I'm always, not that I have any my knowledge is just from what I've heard and what I've read and understood with some very small insights of my own. Um, so first of all, it's important to distinguish between material desire and spiritual desire because some traditions will say that desire is the problem, desire itself, and it should be eliminated or extinguished altogether, that we should replace all desires for anything other than God, and let me back up. So some traditions will say desire itself is the problem, eliminate desire, that's it, and there's a kind of liberation or a moksha that happens as a result of kind of eliminating desire altogether. Bhakti, it's a little bit different. We say that we want to eliminate every desire except for the only natural desire that has any real substance. All other desires are rooted in illusions because they're rooted in desires for things that aren't real, that don't last, that can't provide happiness. So they are illusory desires. The only real desire that can exist is the only one that can actually be fulfilled, and that's the desire for communion or relationship with God. So in bhakti, we say like that's the focus. The heart and soul are always sending out a signal, or they're always looking to connect. Like I used this example before in some videos, but it's like you're a cell phone that's always looking for a Wi-Fi signal to connect to. And all of the illusory desires are signals we can connect to, and then they all follow the same path. They turn us in the wheel of fortune over and over. And we keep thinking if I can modify or move things around, then if I'll get comfortable and I'll taste and realize the full satisfaction of something or another. That doesn't happen, and so we get frustrated, and then we try a new desire, and all of these are like the illusory signals that we're trying to connect to. You can't ever get rid of the fact that your heart wants to connect, that your heart wants to reach out. So in that sense, in bhakti, we don't think that desire is a bad thing. We just think it's misguided when it's aimed at material things. And instead, we're trying to replace it with spiritual desire, which is the desire that the heart has to connect with the real signal, the real source. Now, it's very experiential. So, in other words, bhakti teachers, like my own teachers, and what I've been, taught and what I've learned through my own experience is that this is not something you believe in. You don't just believe in it; you do it. So, when we chant mantra every day, in particular, or when we, when we experience kirtan together in community, when we serve our deities on the altar, when we offer our food, there's so many different practices of bhakti, but those practices are building within us the connection that exists in bhakti through service and love of God. So we practice those things, and as you practice those things, they're experiential. And as you practice them, you start to realize what it feels like to connect with something true and to connect with something whole and holy and divine. And you can see for yourself the difference between connecting in the heart with something of spiritual substance versus something of worldly hollowness. So we don't tell people just believe this. We say practice it, try it. Don't sit in idle mental speculation about it, because we're not asking you to idly mentally believe something. Try it for yourself. Try connecting with a vegetarian lifestyle that doesn't drink or take drugs, that is very careful with our energy, with who we hang out with, that brings talk and conversation about spiritual philosophy, that brings chanting of sacred mantra, that bring these things into your life, and see for yourself if there is a tangible difference between how your heart and soul start to feel in doing these things, versus the other material desires that you may pursue. So it's very much experiential. Now, the reason that I'm saying that is because abstractly, it's really hard for people to imagine the spiritual desire to be with God in heaven. Like that just sounds like something that, you're told as, I mean, I remember Sunday school teachers telling me things like that and just being like, you know, I was at the age where I realized Santa Claus was maybe not real. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, what are you going to tell me? I should just think only about not being in this world that I'm in right now and instead dwell on something I have no idea, no experience about, and just want to be there, in heaven with God. Like what? I can't relate to that. So I don't think that's what bhakti is about. It's not just desire to be in heaven with God and forget about all the crap in the world or something. It's just that'd be too simplistic, right? So again, it's experiential. One of the things that I've found is that it begins by just testing the hypothesis, do your material desires satisfy you? And if the answer is no, then try spiritual things, try a spiritual lifestyle. Now, bhakti is universalist in terms of if there is an approach to God that's personal, that's coming from the heart, and there's different practices or traditions, then those are bhakti. We consider those, if they have that aim of love of God, then that's bhakti too. But try a practice and see what starts to happen. And here's what my experience has been, and what I'd say a vast majority of my friends that I can probably speak for safely in Krishna consciousness who have had similar experiences, which is why we're all still here doing this stuff, right? And that is the experience of Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Not that we can realize those things fully, but that you get glimpses of them. You get eternality. You get the sense of something that is eternal, that's timeless, that is forever. And you sometimes get glimpses of that when you chant or when you tend to the deities. You get into deep, deep states, not all that often for me, but sometimes you get into these very deep states in mantra meditation and you just go, wow, like I'm in a different space of consciousness. And when you come out of that consciousness, it's almost like there's a glow over the world and you can see God and you can see that which is eternal in everything. Even though it's time bound and passing and coming and going, suddenly it sort of shines with eternity. The other thing is that, you've got, so that's sat, and then you've got chit. So there's knowledge and truth, meaning you start getting filled from within when you take up spiritual life with real understanding about yourself, about your own motivations, though very slowly sometimes, right? But you also get a sense of, it's like you have an intelligent GPS inside of you that's starting to give you glimpses into truth. And so the timelessness, the eternity, the truth, and the ananda, which is the bliss. So, I mean, when I'm singing kirtan, when I'm chanting the names of God, sometimes it's just duty, right? And then other times it feels deeply and intensely out of this world happy. There's a famous book from the Bhakti tradition just called Chant and Be Happy. People who give chanting a serious go will start to recognize that there is a form of happiness and satisfaction that arises in spiritual practice. Sometimes it feels austere and it feels duty bound, but you'll notice that when you bring your heart and your soul and your emotions into your chanting and you start pouring almost like the stream of mental stuff into this devotional act with these sacred mantras, the names of God, that suddenly bliss starts to appear in your heart, even if it's just a tiny little fraction of it, or you get a glimpse of it coming from the mercy of somewhere else. You feel it. So those are the qualities of God. And those are the qualities that define the form of God, the personal form of God. God is eternality, bliss, and knowledge, and truthfulness, all combined. So you start in bhakti, what we say is when you start to desire God, it's not just, well, I want to go be with God in some heavenly place because this place sucks. That desire can't be fully recognized until one on faith says, these things aren't doing it for me. I'm going to give it a try. And then as I give it a try, I start to develop the sense that there are these qualities that exist. They exist within me, and they exist in this divine form, this divine being, whose attributes are all of the greatest attributes, whose personal form is both a state of consciousness and an actual person. So there's like, God is not just a discrete, like a physical material person. God is a transcendental person. And so there's a sense of when you're taking on these spiritual practices, you start to realize that they all emanate from all the things that you're experiencing within, the truth, the goodness, the bliss, the knowledge, the stuff that starts to come up, and you start to understand that it's emanating from a source, from a transcendental being. And that being in Krishna Bhakti we call Krishna. But Krishna has many names and many forms, innumerable names and forms. And so too, every approach to God is infinitely personal and unique. So you start to feel this sense of intimate personal connection with this being and with the state of being that emanates from that divine person into our hearts when we practice. You just start to feel that kind of stuff. And then so you say, well, how can I serve, love, be closer to these qualities, this state of consciousness, this being that is the source of all of it? In that way, we say artfully, metaphorically, and in a sense, literally, all at once, that we desire to be with God in heaven, or we desire to be in the spiritual world in our spiritual forms with the divine person of God. But most people who are looking on the outside in, who haven't started to enter into the esoteric dimensions of the practice, may see that as sort of literal and antiquated, and they may not have a sense of the interiority and depth of what's meant with these words. And so, I say this because, so is it to simply be with God in a form of heaven? Yes and no. You know what I mean? It's because these are states of consciousness that the individual soul is entering into in order to experience God. But they're states of consciousness that exist, as well as actual relationships between beings that exist all at the same time. The closest thing I can equate it to is if you've ever done mantra meditation, or really any form of meditation, and let's say the object of your meditation moves on to someone that you love very dearly. Sometimes our minds wander, but they find interesting resting places, right? Like in meditation, suddenly you'll feel the spirit of your deceased grandmother, something like that. You'll just be really thinking of her or something. And you start to commune in appreciation with this other soul. You start to see things, remember things, wonder things, but it becomes almost like an undulating flower of thought and mind and intention and attention that's circulating around your grandmother. Sometimes things like that happen in meditation. But one of the things that of course, often people think is so healing about meditation or any kind of contemplative prayer is that such connections that happen like that in prayer, they help us. They're so healing, right? They fill us with this sense of intimacy with my grandmother or whoever, my wife or my kids, and they reconnect me in the heart to their actual soul and essence. And my relationship with them gets realer and more embodied and intimate, while at the same time, I recognize that the thing that was connecting me to them was this kind of this state of consciousness that I entered into that yoked me or joined me to them somehow. So I think that getting to like understanding what spiritual desire is can't really happen outside of learning to have small experiences through things like mantra meditation that start to connect you with God, that start to bring the feeling of dwelling on or connecting with God. And that's why it's so important in bhakti that we cultivate personal understanding of these stories and rituals and so many things that get us closer to this personal form, which is Krishna or Krishna Radha. So anyway, I hope I'm not speaking too abstractly, but the essence of it is that our desiring of God is something that can only emerge from within the actual experimentation of starting to move toward God in a spiritual practice. The only thing one has to do to get to that space of saying I'm going to give this a try, in my opinion, is to say, look, other things in the world aren't satisfying me. There's something really appealing about the idea of a spiritual desire that might be more satisfying, and I'm going to give it a try. And then if you get that far, then the important thing is don't stop, because once you say I'm going to give it a try, it takes a while. This is not a pill that you take that works in 2 hours. This is something, I mean, sometimes it is, it can be, God can be as fast as God wants to be, but it is my experience that, take a year to chant every day of your life and notice the difference a year later. Take a year to take a few practices, maybe a few, kind of lifestyle principles from a practice, apply it for a long time, and then see where you're at. It's not just like, am I going to have some kind of experience? Am I going to get something out of this? There's a degree of surrender that one has to take into it. And then one naturally starts realizing what spiritual desire is and what it even means to talk about a spiritual world or a relationship with God. So that's part one. In part two, we're going to look at, can form of spiritual desire become corrupt? This is a very interesting follow-up question that the same person had. So I'll come back to that. Hope that this was enjoyable, and thanks for listening. Hare Krishna.